Go. And we are live. We are live, and I have not yet pulled up our own streaming page so that I can watch for notifications. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Christopher Lowry and Cameron Anderson. Brushfire Mind, East Atlanta Video. We are we got some stuff to talk about tonight. So, I am going to shut up, and I'm not going to do my usual intro monologue. I'm going to pass it off to Cameron. I want you to apprise us of the situation. We haven't been live in several weeks now. Just had a bunch going on with the new business, the video business, and a fourth. Yes, we're up to 4 Rugrats in my house now too. So, the madness is never ending. So Cameron, why don't you tell us about this terrorist hate group?
Well, I live in a fantastic place in North Georgia. That's right on the border of Alabama, and it is everything that you expect rural Georgia to be. Lots of churches, lots of barbecues, lots of baseball teams, football teams, hunting. You know, you can turn your kids outside to play because if they do something wrong, your neighbor knows you and will bump into you at Walmart and tell you what your kid did. It's Polk County, Georgia. And all this is being brought up because what I would describe as a bullying, hostile, atheist hate group saw the coach of Cedartown High School make a short sermon before the Georgia Assembly several weeks ago, back in March. And this football coach is also a ordained minister. And so he gave a brief sermon. And as a result of this sermon, this charming little group known as the Freedom from Religion, well, they were terribly offended. And so they dug through Coach Kelley, and yes, his name is Kelley. They dug through everything that Coach Kelley does, and they found out that Cedartown High School has a chaplain. And this chaplain, just so that we're clear, is a volunteer. And in fact, he makes it a point to feed the boys a hot meal every time he gets together with them. And as is wont to do with many Southern football teams, the chaplain leads the boys in prayer before every game. And they don't pray for victory. They pray for guidance and safety and sportsmanship. However, the Freedom from Religion group, they took great offense to all of this. And they sent official letters to the Polk County school superintendent, who not only leaned on Coach Kelley, and now the chaplain is gone, but it's now basically policy for Polk County that teachers and coaches cannot pray with their students under any circumstances. And this doesn't just include games. This is also in situations like team banquets, where you might pray over your meal before you eat it. Nope, no more. Can't be done. So in short, this hostile atheist group that of their 31,000 members has, based on the research I've done, only about 500 members total in the state of Georgia, a state of millions, by the way. They basically came in out of nowhere and threatened legal action against a county that I live in because it's the kind of place where, you know, there are volunteer chaplains that pray with the football team before every game. They sailed in out of nowhere because Well, they understand that communities like mine don't exactly have millions of dollars in the budget to fight things in court, and they have effectively changed policy for the entire county. And I'm not one to use the word offended lightly. I think it is the tool of a weak mind for the most part. Ah, oh, you offend me. Me. No, 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 no. Offenses are taken, not given. And yet, this was such a...
Let me interrupt for just a second.
Please.
Just to be clear, there has been no complaint made that we're aware of. This organization has taken it upon itself to interject itself into a matter utterly unrelated to itself. Frankly, I think the case that a judge in a case such as this would easily find that the Freedom from Religion Foundation does not have standing to bring cause.
Yes, actually. And I even reached out through social media to the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And they told me that they only respond to complaints. That, and I'm paraphrasing them somewhat, that they don't just stick their nose in wherever they feel like. They are responsive organization. However, their own website doesn't mention a complaint at all. And
yeah, I've got the letter right here, which very button. I thought I had it. I don't. Okay, my bad. Anyway, I've got the letter pulled up right.
and now the fact that this community like the wrestling coaches pray with the kids, the volleyball coaches pray with the kids. There is this whole cross current in this community where the churches and the coaches and the mentors all run in the same basic circles. And they actually see it as a duty, not just as Christians to proselytize, but as good people trying to exercise their Christian faith to be available for the young people in our community, because they'll build the bonds with the kids, and then sometimes they can actually have real impact on these kids' lives. And because, again, we're a county that does not have a lot of money. They're like, our baseball team went to state last year, and the churches were actually actively involved in the sort of bake sale sort of activities to help fundraise, to get the kids there so they can have the once in a lifetime experience. And a good bit of that has been effectively shut down now because basically Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter in 1802, some near 30 years after the Constitution was written. And in sort of an exasperated tone, actually use the original statement, church and state. And this didn't really have an effect on anything until the 1960s. So we're talking about some 160-year gap. And that was when the Supreme Court of the 1960s decided to federalize their interpretation of church and state, which amounts to somebody like a teacher or a police officer or whatever, when they're acting in an official capacity, they cannot make expressions of faith because it constitutes an official endorsement of religion. And because of that, groups like this hostile atheist organization, basically they're bullies. Let's be clear. I'm not even going to use big fancy words. They're bullies. They're angry that us religious nerds have something that makes us happy, and they can't stand it because, like many bullies, they're sad about their own pathetic lives. So instead of aspiring, instead
religion, as far as left-wing terrorists like this are concerned, religion's just like babies. It makes people happy, and so we should murder it.
Yes, and it gives you a deeper satisfaction in your life. And because man is an inherently spiritual creature, if you believe in God or Jesus or whatever, you are in many ways inoculated against secular socialist tendencies. So we can't have that God stuff.
God forbid your life include anything meaningful that doesn't include toiling and laboring to fill the coffers so that the state can dole out your pittance and maintain your barest meager survival in order that it has an additional revenue flow that it can dole out to the less adequate. Like hostile foreign invaders.
Yeah, and I'll just point out that speaking of, giving things to the less adequate, man, churches are really good at that. And so that might almost be like a secondary reason why you'd want to get them out of the way if you want the state to be in charge of this entire process. And Reverend Benfield, and that is the chaplain in question, he didn't just pray with these boys. He would do things like make sure they had a hot meal waiting for them after every game. And sometimes, it was just chicken and rice. But hey, I don't know if you've ever played a football game or a baseball game or a soccer game or whatever, but sometimes you walk off that field and you are hungry and you are thirsty, and somebody giving you a bowl of chicken and rice and a glass of sweet iced tea is just going to make your day. And again, that's another thing that's not going to happen anymore because, well, please believe that Chaplain Benfield has resigned, and the community is not happy with it, but it is what it is. The cudgel of the state was used to reach down into my tiny parcel of land that my wife and I choose to live in on purpose. Because again, it is the kind of place where, the football coaches and the baseball coaches and the volleyball coaches and the drama teachers and a lot of these people that are leaders in youth are also part of church communities. And there is this whole overlap in the Venn diagram. And it's actually very comforting to people like me. And now there has been a barrier that's been put in place because, we have to think of the children, right? We can't have stupid Southern rednecks like myself No, we're not allowed to brainwash kids. Forget the fact that some of these kids, some of the boys in particular, have zero role model at their house. That the only positive adult male interaction they have are these men that pray with them and treat them like equals and show them the respect and humanity that is expected of the Christian ethic. No. Forget that. We're gonna throw all that away because Thomas Jefferson got aggravated 200 years ago and wrote a letter that didn't have anything to do with the Constitution.
Right. I'm gonna ask you to pause for just a minute. I want to say hello to a few people who are watching. Looks like C.J. Lester. Um, hey, buddy. Glad to see you join us tonight. Do us a favor. Um, I normally ask that, and this I'm just a YouTube personalities thing in general. You know, we always ask that you like, share, and subscribe because it helps the channel to grow. But this is important. This is a case where a dangerous, hostile, far left activist organization is going out of its way intentionally to cause harm, and they're doing it I mean, it's the worst sort of cowardice. They're choosing small targets that cannot defend themselves and attacking them to cause them harm. The very first thing that anyone learns when they attend a law school is that crime is harm. If you cannot define the harm, if you cannot define a victim, then you haven't got a crime. Well, just because a thing isn't made illegal doesn't mean that harm cannot be identified. In fact, one of the ways that laws, especially in criminal code, occur is that harm is done which is not explicitly criminalized, and then in the course of complaint and investigation, statutory law is developed to deal with this previously unaddressed harm. So it is in fact my contention that what this organization is doing is tantamount to crime, and explicitly it is a crime against the Constitution, because what is being done is in attacking this small town school the way that they are. Their argument is one of a separation of church and state. I find it absolutely hilarious that atheists pretend to not have a religion. At its very core, a religion is an amalgamation of rules and beliefs held on faith or by philosophy. Atheists hold on faith alone that there is no God. Now, I'm gonna share something that I don't generally like to speak about publicly, because my faith is very personal and private to me, and it's not something that I usually discuss in great detail. And I won't go into great detail here. I am not a Christian, certainly not in the more traditional sense of the meaning of the word. But I have studied religion and Christianity in particular quite deeply. Anselm of Canterbury forwarded the argument that God is that than which greater cannot be conceived. It is better to exist in reality than to exist in theory. Ergo, God exists. It is often pointed out by theologians and philosophers of religion, religious philosophers more than theologians, but it's often pointed out that this argument is weak because it's circular. The definition is contained within the premise. I disagree, and here's my point. This argument is not one of identity. It doesn't say The argument doesn't make a claim as to who or what this God is. What the argument does is it makes the case that there must be something which exists in the position that is reserved for the deity. There's the thing that's the greatest thing we're aware of, and then there's something far greater than that. And then there's something, and up and up and up and up. But eventually, you come to a point where nothing is greater than this one thing. That doesn't guarantee the identity of this object or entity, which we're referring to as God, but we can use this word easily to claim, to make the claim there is something at that position. The atheist would have you believe that nothing occupies a topmost position. Here's the problem with that statement. In order to argue that there is nothing which occupies a supreme position in reality, that there's no such thing as absolute actuality, that nothing exists in fully realized potentiality, and that in no case is potentiality utterly subserved to actuality, that argument requires the exception of an infinite regression or an infinite progression, neither of which are feasible, right? We can easily dismiss the idea that the world is perched on the back of a turtle when you ask, what does the turtle stand on? And the little old lady says, well, he's on the back of another turtle. Well, what's that turtle on? Well, it's turtles all the way down. Well, no. As Wittgenstein put it, there is at some point you must give an end to the giving of grounds. You know, as parents, many of us feel guilty when we have to finally answer the question why with because. Well, why, Daddy? Well, because this, this, and this. Well, why, Daddy? Well, because this, this, and this. Well, why? Because. Just because.
Because I'm your dad.
Well, and Wittgenstein's point was if we do not establish and accept a firm foundation on which to place arguments and go with that, you know, there must be an end to the giving of grounds. There has to be a point at which we just accept, okay, this is reality. This is the world on which our arguments stand. If we can't get to that, then we can never build upon it. We can never actually argue upward.
Yeah, so if we can't agree that 2 plus 2 equals 4, we can't move on to algebra.
Right. We must have first principles from which to argue, or we cannot even have philosophy or thought. These freedom from religion
dirtbags.
That's not the word I was going to use.
Leftist scum.
Zealots.
Zealots, yes. I think zealotry is a good word for it because it's fascinating how they argue from a position of faith and emotionality, despite the fact they cannot prove their negative any more than I can prove my positive.
Be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. Okay, C.J. Lester's making some comments in the thread there. So, CJ, like I said a minute ago, I'm not what you would call a Christian traditionally. My faith is, like I said, it's something that I keep very personally and privately. But if you go back and watch a few of our previous episodes, I've done 2 or 3 where I talk about my opinion that Christianity is good and healthy for the United States of America, and I premise that on this claim. It is better that a country, a nation, has religion, not necessarily a religion, but religion generally. It is also best that amid the peoples of a nation there is consensus on what is moral and good. Now, the thing that I like about religion generally, and the reason I think it's important for the country, for a nation, is that religion itself is the single most efficient vessel that we have. It is absolutely the most efficient vehicle that we have for the transmittal of morality to the following generation. Children are best served by the active transmittal of morality. The atheist would argue that you don't need an invisible sky daddy to tell you that it's bad to rape people and to murder people. That's just a false statement. It's false. It's utterly untenable. It's completely false. We don't rape and murder people because we have decided not to. Because through the course of developing commerce and interchange between peoples, we have foregone as much war as possible, as much conquest as possible, in exchange for fair trade between like entities. And so sex is an activity of consent and commerce, right? We acquire properties and necessities and material through commerce, through exchange and trade, rather than through conquest. We stop slaughtering each other. The elimination of slavery, which is the moral good. Slavery was the moral good, the moral evolutionary maneuver millennia ago, which saved men from being slaughtered wholesale by their conquerors. Until a certain point, it was that if you conquered an enemy, you killed every man, woman, and child, and then somebody came up with this idea of slavery. You just keep them, in that state, and you don't have to kill them all. Now, bear in mind, I'm not making a positive argument for the gross chattel slavery which existed in the United States as a result of the Muslim and black active slave trade from Africa. I'm talking about the prisoner of war slavery that was resultant in tribal wars that existed before the original caliphate started developing chattel slavery as a means to enslave the Christians and move to destroy the Vatican, which of course brought on the First Crusades. Now, that development as a moral evolution, yes, eventually it came to be twisted and treated wrongly. As I was explaining to Cameron earlier, one of the things that concerns me about attacks on religion like this is that I'm going to get into the healthcare thing for a second. Think about what health insurance looks like right now, what's happening politically with healthcare, and this move to convert this move to try and convert health insurance into a completely socialized government controlled program. The thing that is most frightening about that activity, think about the roads, the military, and the police. All three of these things are now handled by the government, almost to pure exclusivity. Right? I mean, there are still such things as private mercenary organizations. There are still such things as private security and police forces. And there are still such things as private roads. But by and large, the average citizen will never interact with any of that. And largely, if they are even aware of those facts, they hear about it tangentially and third-handed. They don't honestly believe that roads can be built by private people, that railroads can be built by private people, that a military or a police force can be handled by private commerce. They don't believe that to be possible. And they don't understand that that's the only way it was done.
Up until just a couple hundred years ago, yeah.
Less than a couple hundred years ago. The income tax wasn't even put into place until 106 years ago, 1913. There wasn't the revenue to do that at that point. Now, so in 20 or 30 or 40 years, if the health insurance industry has been completely overtaken by the government, people will not understand that private citizens can do it better than the government, And they won't believe that there was a time before the government handled all the health care. They will think of it, and they will think, oh, it's too big, too important, and too hard. Only the government could possibly handle it. So, like I was explaining a moment ago, when slavery first occurred, it was a moral evolution. It was an improvement over the state of the world prior. It became something else over time. If you read into it a little bit, for a long time, the only real slavery that existed in the Western world, the Greek and Romans, using it functionally as their welfare system. It was a more complex and expanded sort of bread and circus system, kind of at Circus. But it became something else. Today, most Americans are not aware that there was ever a type of slavery that was not the vulgar and perverted chattel slavery of humans selling one another as property, that came to be, that came here to the United States. They don't understand. They're not even aware that there was a different type of slavery before, and that it was absolutely a moral positive as the alternative to just death. And I mean wholesale slaughter of entire nations. It was the alternative to that, right? So if organizations like this are left unchecked, if organizations like the zealots at this hate group, Freedom from Religion Foundation, are left unchecked in attacks like this, then in a few dozen years, people will not understand that there used to be religions which were not basically just jihad organizations. They'll, when they think of religion in 50 or 100 years, they'll think that religion was only ever jihad. It was whatever the most evil incarnation of religion could possibly be. They won't even be aware that there was such a thing as Buddhism or Taoism or Wicca or Hindu or whatever. They won't even be aware that there were such things as religions which were utterly pacifist. And please don't mistake that as an endorsement for pacifism. Pacifism is a benchmark of antithesis to jihad, but not at all an acceptable moral position. Pacifism is the opposite of decency. So,
if I may,
please.
Look, you had a long wind up, but the point you're making is actually entirely appropriate, because I spent. Yeah, obviously, that's right. It's your show. You're right, of course. But all jokes aside, I spent a lot of time basically trolling around their social media pages over the past several hours. And one thing that I saw a lot on these pages was a phrase that went something like this: one day, the concept of religion will be thought of the same way that racism is thought of, the same way that slavery is thought of, and so forth and so on. That basically religion is every bit as backwards of an idea as racism, as white nationalism, whatever. And we'll actually be better off as a species when we jettison this backwards transmission of morality. And yeah, so the point that you're making, that my grandchildren could be like, yeah, but Papa, why, who cares about Jesus, and why was he such a big deal? I don't actually think that's far off. I mean, it might sound extremely radical to anybody that's listening to us, but once upon a time, something like an income tax would have been extremely radical. Once upon a time, something like socialized medicine would have been considered extremely radical. And now we move into a world where if you try and explain to somebody, no, I promise, the roads will get built even if there's no government, because people are still going to want to go from point A to point B. They're literally not going to be able to wrap their brain around it, because everything about their experience in life says only government can do this. Only the state can do this. The state effectively replaces all other religions, because man as a creature, as a species, is built with a hunger for the divine. We all of us, even the atheists, seem to understand that there is a thing apart from ourselves that is intangible and larger than ourselves. There is something else, some other, that we might not be able to define, but we can aspire to it. And I would tell you, both as a Christian and as somebody that is really fascinated by history, there is no more important event that ever happened, ever, than the life and death of Jesus Christ. Period. 2,000 years ago, when Jesus was walking around, I mean, seriously, at the risk of sounding racist and all the other horrible little buzzwords that you can all toss
Jesus.
off with.
Don't make that face.
Sorry, it just bothers me. But seriously, picture in the Middle East a man that says, hey, you know what you should do? You should love your enemy. What? 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 Yeah, go ahead. Show me the culture in the Middle East that will produce that now. Please. In fact, I don't even mean this sarcastically. I mean, please, show me the culture that will do that. The real irony of this is, were it not for the concepts of tolerance that Jesus brought to the entire world, the fact that we can argue these points verbally as opposed to hacking each other to pieces with swords, well, I mean, that's kind of all him. And I mean, even down to the crucifixion itself, if we just take it on faith, and of course we have to take it on faith, that Jesus was the Son of God, how much bigger of a sacrifice could you possibly make? We're literally going to kill a deity so that the world can have an example of what real peace, real mercy, real tolerance looks like. And again, that's why hate groups, bullies, like these Freedom from Religion Foundation nuts, want religion out of the way. Because if you can point to Jesus and go, no, actually, I've already got a Savior, and he died for my sins 2,000 years ago, and you know, it actually gives me an example of behavior that allows for me to forgive you and for you to forgive me, and recognize that we're all human, we all make mistakes, and maybe we screwed today up terribly, but you know what? Tomorrow's a new day, and maybe we could do just a little bit better, just a smidge. Well, you don't need the state anymore. One of the other trends that I noticed as I perused all their social media stuff was how many of them were avowed socialists. And in fact, I ran across this one particular article in a couple of different places that asserted there is no socialist principle that is also a Christian principle. And there were many in these groups, the commenters. I'm a comment guy. I know they say stay out of the comments. It's the sewer, and it's my weakness. I love the comments. Yeah. But there were many in the comments that responded to these articles with statements like, all the more reason I'm glad to say I'm a socialist. And that's pretty terrifying, because I would say here and now, and I consider myself pretty open-minded, but I don't think you can change my mind on this point. Civilization, as we know it, this webcam, the internet, the fact that Chris and I are friends, even though we live almost 100 miles away, and we stay in regular contact with one another on our smartphones that are basically, data from Star Trek in our pocket. That all exists because of Christianity. It all exists because this really radical guy named Jesus said, maybe you should love your enemy. Yeah, you know what? Yeah, maybe you should love your enemy. That might work out better than, the fact that up to this point, as Chris pointed out, we just kill people by the thousands because, well, you went to war with another nation and you couldn't risk a second war. So you basically have to kill everybody that's like over the age of 9 because they'll remember what you did to their parents and they'll lead an uprising against you. There's actually a lot of trust that's built into Christian principles. I'm going to assume the best about you, and you are going to assume the best about me until I give you contrary evidence. And even if I give you contrary evidence, maybe you give me a pass or two, because we're humans and we're fallible. And I would like to take that sentence right there. We're humans and we're fallible. And I would like to go straight to the Supreme Court. The biggest thing that groups like the Freedom from Religion, whatever, I don't even want to say their whole name anymore.
FFRF.
Yeah, FFRF.
We're not happy,
and we're not happy, and we want to make everybody else miserable because praying to their sky daddy makes them genuinely happy, and we don't get that. And we were also the same kids in school that made fun of you for not liking Star Wars because we don't get why lightsabers are cool. Sorry.
Before we get to how the constant refrain to the Supreme Court decisions should be likened to atrocities like Roe v. Wade, Marbury versus Madison, Dred Scott. I want to stick with attacking the atheists for a minute. This is a paper that I wrote some time ago entitled "Turtle Stacking." It's not crazy long. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to hit you with some excerpts. But having a faith is at least precisely as logically coherent as denying faith, and religion is the most efficient vehicle available to society for the transmission of morality. This paper examines arguments against faith and theism made by atheists. It is this writer's position that Richard Dawkins and his ilk engage in an intellectually dishonest brand of faux criticism, thought dismissal, that is deleterious to the broad discourse of science and philosophy by dismissing thinkers of faith. Special attention is given to Dawkins as he so epitomizes the hostile atheist as defined by William L. Rowe. Now, Rowe talked about a hostile atheist and a friendly atheist. So let me dig into that for just a minute. When Rowe talked about the hostile atheist and the friendly atheist, the hostile atheist actively kind of hates that you have faith. The friendly atheist just doesn't have faith. So the hostile atheist will say, if there is an all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing God, then there cannot be any suffering in the world. There is suffering in the world, therefore there is no God. Rowe, who is an atheist, pointed out, well, now hold on a minute. That argument is as logically consistent as the argument premise, there is a God. 2, if there is an all-powerful, all-knowing, all-seeing God, all-loving God, then there cannot be any preventable suffering in the world. There is a God who is all-knowing, all-powerful, and all-loving. Therefore, none of the suffering in the world which occurs is preventable. There's your problem of evil, pretty neatly buttoned up by by a no shit atheist, and I mean a professional atheist, not a weekend warrior like Richard Dawkins, who is the one that I targeted here because, well, he's just a douchebag. I will demonstrate the dangers of this sort of lazy thinking by showing a few of the premises asserted by Dawkins and parroted by his peers to be dubious strawmen, baseless ad hominem attacks, and self-reflexively axiomatic. Beginning with his illicit definition of faith as the strongest reason for his dismissal, we will examine his premises, refute his claims to moralizing, and defend theism as being at least as logically coherent as its opposite. It is not my intent to dismiss atheism's arguers entirely. Thinkers like Nietzsche and Rowe have at least done the theologian the courtesy of not smashing him against the rocks of ridicule and categorical dismissal. Dawkins has said, I am against religion because it teaches us to be satisfied with not understanding the world. I find this a peculiar assertion to be made by one who obsesses of contradictions in books of faith while going on in his own book to say, if it satisfies our yearning to understand why we exist, from the God delusion, this certainly begs the question, if it is not contradiction that is so abhorrent as to demand extraction from the dialect, then what is your objection? I suspect the answer is that his hypocrisy has flung too far for autocritical observation. This is the root of his first mistake, the definition of faith. The dictionary supplied with Microsoft Word defines, this is a quote from Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. The dictionary supplied with Microsoft Word defines a delusion as a persistent false belief held in the face of strong contradictory evidence, especially as a symptom of psychiatric disorder. The first part captures religious faith perfectly. Direct quote. Putting aside the academic sloth of grabbing a simple definition from a single source for the central target of your criticism without further interrogation, this blatant substitution of definitions is lazily dishonest. Words have meanings. He is arguing meanings. The definition of faith is supplied by the same Microsoft Word dictionary, which is OED, by the way, the Oxford English Dictionary, is complete trust or confidence in someone or something. My 50-year-old Funkin' Wagnall and my 120-year-old Webster's New International both dedicate a near half page to the meaning of the word. As Dennis Gordon put it, Dawkins invents his own definitions of faith in order to attack and demolish them. That, of course, is classic straw man. As definitions go, that seems to be the precise definition of a straw man argument. The meaning of faith is inconvenient to Dawkins, as it is so vital to his work that leaps of faith be made to connect unconnected events for fear that a god might fall into the gap and get stuck. Gravity, for example, is the stuff that makes us fall and slings the planets around the sky, but neither Dawkins nor his peers in any science can point at it and say what it is. In precisely the same way that one observes the presence of God by observing the effects on it in the world, only by observing that effects have been had can one make observations of gravity. How is this not a thing taken on faith? Here, Dawkins has quite literally supplanted the meaning of his critical target with the definition of a near completely unrelated concept. This is the same as if someone were to say, I am a vegetarian because chickens are fruit. It is an errant straw man, so plain that it cannot have escaped his notice as a thinker. Free spirits should need only a little encouragement to break free of the vice of religion altogether, says the God Delusion. Here, he refers to religion as a vice, which no reasonable lexicographer can meaningfully distinguish from sin without reference to religion. In other places, he chooses to call it a virus and flippantly oscillates between the metaphor of a computer virus and an actual infectious disease. Well, which is it, sir? Is it a self-perpetuating illness of the intellect which is perfectly explicable by the process of universal evolution? Or are we to take it to be the product of a malicious but intelligent designer? Exactly the same thing makes them inescapably vulnerable to infection by software viruses. While it is a common practice of thinkers to begin works on the defining of terms, Dawkins glibly switches the definitions of faith and religion to suit his purposes on convenience. It is no wonder his work is so strongly criticized by his opponents when he begins by painting the mere having of faith as tantamount to madness. When one begins battle with the nuclear option, he cannot expect mercy in the retaliation. If the having of faith is a madness, then what is the alternative? Largely, man sees a complex world and imagines that it is designed. The watchmaker parable is a very good explanation of this idea. But the fact that man has imagined a designer for a great deal longer than he has had watches. For most men, even without deep faith or theological instruction, it is sufficient and even comforting to have the Heideggerian thrownness of living in a world where things are taken care of. The sun shines, the rain falls, the crops grow. For many, this is enough to know. That there is faith in the workings of things without a need for the knowledge of those workings is useful to most people. That God made it so is as useful a cop-out as the idea that all began in a big explosion that we can never observe, prove, disprove, or provide a compelling chain of evidence for. According to Dawkins, explanations of complexity begin According to Dawkins, explanations of complexity being predicated on improbability presents a problem as complex theories make for inferior explanations. The more complex a theory, the less probable it is true. We know that there is a before now. I do not say time here. Time is an obscure and inaccessible a thing as gravity or piety, which only conceptually measures what is and is not now. So at least until the moment that a scientist can point to gravity, identify the missing link in evolution, and coherently distinguish time from space, or definitively equivocate them, faith is just as good an answer, even as theory alone. It is quite possible that a more productive conversation could be had between Dawkins and his critics if he had been more scholarly and less deliberately insulting. J. Thomas Howe, in his essay Affirmations After God, offers that Nietzsche's atheism contains a richer and fuller affirmation of human life than does that of Dawkins. Quick clarification. J. Thomas Howe making his assertion that Nietzsche's atheism contains blah, 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 blah. I'm not convinced that Nietzsche was actually an atheist. I think to assume Nietzsche being an atheist reveals a very, very shallow reading of well, thus spake Zarathustra, for starters.
No,
Now,
Nietzsche was the original black pill before there was
yeah, before what's his face. Howe contends that Dawkins is a cosmic nihilist, and that Nietzsche believed it was still possible in a godless universe to experience great beauty and joy, but at terrific cost and effort. It is of note that Nietzsche did not merely say that God is dead, he lamented that it was so. While Nietzsche seems to have believed that existence was inherently meaningless, he suggested that a militant dedication to works could generate meaning in life. Dawkins made no such concession. I demand that it be true that meaning in life can at least be manufactured. On morality, Dawkins insists that, I said I wasn't going to read the whole thing, but you know what? I'm right there. On morality, Dawkins insists that Darwinian evolution alone is sufficient to transmit a prescriptive code of moral behavior from one generation to the next. He supports this claim with reference to honey badgers being led by honey leaders to hard-won beehives and comparing this to altruistic reciprocity. What is so glaring in this claim is that he suggests this is sufficient to encourage altruism towards the impoverished. If this is the result of the selfish gene, one must ask, what's in it for me? Quite simply, it might be a kindness to offer alms to the poor, but in the strict Darwinian survival of the fittest motif, it can only serve to injure the process of the species. Whatever the reason for the impoverishment of an individual, be it mental illness, poor life choices, or just plain rotten luck, these are all undesirable negative selectors for an evolving species. Scripture offers this. Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. Hebrews 13:16. While Dawkins offers nothing to teach a child, only that it is useful to evolution to do good that will be returned, Scripture, read to the faithful, offers that a thing being pleasing to God is sufficient reason to do it. If it is only good to do if there is an individual reward, then much of charity must be discarded at least as frivolous, but more correctly, as anathema to the sacrosanct evolution. Religion is generally the only efficient tool we have to transmit early morality to the adorable screaming little sociopaths we also love to cuddle. Children, that being antisocial attitudes and behavior and a lack of conscience, are sociopaths nearly until puberty. They must be taught what it is to be social and part of a society. As much as rational men should abhor the doctrine of moral relativism, the truth is that morality is different in different societies, but children are not. No matter the society or local religion of choice, babies are born without knowing the rules. In nearly all instances, it is religion of some sort that is their first exposure and instruction in what morality is. Dawkins seems to suggest that morality can be inborn. Advantage to the genes of the cold virus sufficiently explains the ubiquity of the miserable complaint. I would challenge him to supply babies that are born knowing not to strike or bite their peers and parents. I've got 4. They all have little temper tantrum outbursts when they're young. Of the 10 Commandments and other religious moral codes, Dawkins offers that they, quote, encourage a system of morals which any civilized modern person, whether religious or not, would find, I can put it no more gently, obnoxious. And that's a false statement, okay? That's just patently false. There are whole religions, Islam, where rape is not a crime, and murder under specific circumstances is not only condoned and tolerated, but explicitly, positively required. So,
Hey, buddy.
Yeah,
I
buddy.
thought you said that was a short paper.
It's almost over. While a secular mind might appreciate the dismissal of the first 5 commandments between God and man, I contend that the latter 5, condemning theft, murder, and lying, are quite universally accepted as proper admonition against rightly reviled human habits. While at the furthest left fringe in favor of total National Socialism, one might reasonably demand the dismissal of God's respect, the dissolution of the family unit, rendering the care of the child fully to the state, and unapologetically open marriages, he does not contend for the prosecutorial tolerance of homicide or burglary. However, Dawkins' above statement dismisses even the abhorrence of lying, theft, and murder as obnoxious. I do not actually believe that this is Dawkins' intent. The statement is emblematic of his habitual overstatement of the underconsidered. The argument that morality cannot be legislated has merit on the question of enforcement. One's rights begin and end at the tip of his nose. We are free to do as we like until it affects another person. While one can be imprisoned or executed for murdering, how do we demand that individuals render defense to the soon-to-be otherwise murdered? There is no mechanism to prevent such a crime, only to investigate, prosecute, and punish it. However, personal moral codes encourage us to render aid where we can. But why is that? There is no duty to defend enshrined in the law, not even for police officers. I contend that it is useful for us to hope that some good Samaritan will stop and give us a hand when we are stranded on the side of the road, but I would also find it immoral to compel anyone to do so. I'm not a Christian. I personally reject 3 major tenets of the Dogma. These are absolution, original sin, and proselytization. I believe that faith is deeply personal and not to be sold or bartered. Faith is crafted on the hard contemplation of what, if anything, is meaningful, what one's responsibility to that meaning is, and how that meaning merits deeper contemplation. However, I prefer that Christianity remain the dominant religion in the United States. I judge it, for reasons of equality, liberty, tolerance, and dignity, to be demonstrably superior to its alternatives. So long as there is a religion that is practiced by a large part of the population, then our children will learn a moral code. It is not that Dawkins attacks the Christian that so offends me. It is that he flippantly dismisses the work of thinking and of faith as if mere observation can adequately substitute for understanding. He does not grok.
Wow, so that was 3,000 words that backed up my basic point that Jesus was the original radical, that everything we understand about tolerance and forgiveness and so forth.
Oh, no, I don't think you understood. Here, let me start over. Yeah, it only took 12 minutes. That's nothing.
Yeah, I was clocking you. You were reading fast. No, but all that, and thank you, appreciate it. And just so that people are clear.
Oh, and hi, Rod.
Hey, Rod. Glad you could join us. And
he says he just got the notification at 8:52. That's all right. You can podcast us in the morning.
And just so that we're clear, everybody, Chris kinda has a degree in philosophy, so this is not just him spitballing here. So yeah,
I've read a bunch of books.
Yeah, did read a bunch. Children are little savages. They really are. Any parent will tell you, for example, that one of the most humiliating things that can happen is for your child to have a meltdown in public. And often what will happen in public is other parents will cut you some slack because they know what it's like. Because, I mean, I'll use the phrase again. Children are little savages. They really are. They are me focused. I want this now, and I don't understand why I can't have it right now. And screw you. It's your job to bring me the chocolate milk. It is your job to give me my pacifier. It is your job to hold me. And I don't feel like walking around Walmart. And no, I don't want a 30-minute car drive home.
Okay, so, and you know, let's talk about Jordan Peterson on that for just a second. He puts this very, very well. Children under the age of 9 months are never wrong. They're always right. Okay, a child under the age of 9 months is never ever wrong.
Yeah,
because the only information that they will communicate is I am hungry, I'm dirty, I'm uncomfortable, I'm in pain, I'm cold, I have gas that's causing me pain. The only information that they ever communicate is I am not currently happy. And you live with it for a minute, and you'll kind of start to learn the flavors. It's like, okay, this kind of unhappy is the baby's hungry. This kind of unhappy is the baby's butt is dirty. This kind of unhappy is I need to slap her on the back so she'll burp. Yeah, I mean we've got a 6-week-old in the house right now. This is number 4. This ain't my first rodeo. But
yeah, my pediatrician used to for my first 2 children used to make this great joke. So when the baby cries, try feeding them. If they're still crying, try changing them. If they're still crying, try holding them. If they're still crying, try burping them. If they're still crying, try taking their clothes off. If they're still crying, try putting their clothes back on. If after all of that, that's when you call me. And it's because you're exactly correct. They come up in a world, and for complex reasons of biology and the fact that we can have this this super advanced brain that will let us figure out things like quantum mechanics and philosophy and
religion.
Religion, there's a good one. Yeah. And religion, the fact that we can go ahead and imprint on our children from an early age, hey, here's this thing that's bigger than yourself, and this thing that's bigger than yourself is not only pleased when you make the right decision, but it also gives you a path to have greater satisfaction in your life when you make the right decision. And as a consequence, if you make the right decisions, the people around you will benefit uh, almost as a secondary benefit from your right decisions. Well, religion imprints that on children. And the thing that groups like, this freedom from their garbage, whatever, I don't even want to say their name again, like they want the elimination of religion. They do. And I know I said it a little earlier in this podcast, but it's old, it's outdated, it's antiquated. We don't need to pray with our 2-year-olds and tell them to thank Jesus for their chocolate milk and their cookies because well, that's just stupid. We should totally be able to communicate with a 2-year-old, except a lot of people that actually have 2-year-olds know that's not how that works at all. And so that now that you've retroactively used a paper you wrote for college to back up my point, and thank you, muchas gracias. The Supreme Court. What this group leaned on was a series of Supreme Court decisions that came out in the 60s. And what happened with these decisions, and just Google them, I'm not going to go into the specifics. Originally, I had planned on it, but we normally keep these to an hour, and we're already running long. So if you're curious, Google them. They're there. They're easy to read about. In summary, these are the decisions where the court looked at certain cases, and then they took this letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote in 1802. Now, mind you, 1802 was almost a full 30 years after the Constitution as we know it. The Declaration of Independence and all that other good stuff was written. They interpreted his intent when he talked about a separation of church and state. The First Amendment is very clear. It gives us the freedom to associate. It gives us a freedom of press. It gives us a freedom of religion. But expressing it in those terms is actually not entirely accurate. It's more accurate to compare it to the Second Amendment. And by that I mean the government is not allowed to interfere with religion. The government is not allowed to interfere with association. The government is not allowed to interfere with expression. Just like, theoretically, the government is not supposed to interfere with owning firearms.
Well, okay, so there's an important distinction here. I know the words, but I'm going to pull it up and read it off.
Oh, please do.
So the First Amendment reads as such: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or of the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress grievances. So the Establishment Clause is that one right there. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. The concern is that if the state guarantees a religion, installs a religion, and calls it the official religion, then everybody's required to attend that religion.
Yeah, like England and the Catholics, basically. I mean, it's pretty clear if you study world history on a broad scale,
right.
They did not want Catholicism to be the official religion of the United States.
And at the time, the Catholic Church, at the time of the founding, the Catholic Church was essentially in near full control of the monarchy.
And not just in England, but also France, Spain. Yes. I mean, it is what it is. And I'm not hating on Catholicism, but
they are the original globalists.
Yeah, yeah,
The Vatican is the original New World Order.
Yeah.
And then, but Congress shall make no law. So, the Second Amendment says that a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. There's a word missing here. There's a word in the Second Amendment that is conspicuously absent. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. The First Amendment forbids the government, forbids the Congress from enacting laws which respect the establishment of religion or prohibit its free practice or abridge the freedom of speech, the press, or assembly.
Association, yeah.
The freedom of association isn't actually mentioned in the First Amendment. It is extrapolated from the principle of the freedom to assemble.
Yes, and I am one of those people that firmly believes that you cannot have assembly without association.
That's correct. That's correct. And of course, the freedom of association is the correct defense in the claims against the baker not wanting to bake a cake for a gay wedding. Freedom of association. I should not have to cohort with people with whom I wish not to cohort. If I can be forced to converse with people, then I can be forced to breed with people. And frankly, most people are not adequate to bear my spawn.
And I haven't met your wife. She's pretty amazing.
So, the Second Amendment does not name a branch of the government. The Second Amendment says that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. But the First Amendment is an injunction against a specific body, the Congress. Now, there's a few things to take away here. One of them I loathe, but it is a fair argument. And that is that under that language, it is reasonable to assume that an individual state, especially with deference to the 10th Amendment, all those powers and liberties not explicitly granted to the government under this Constitution are reserved to the state and the people beneath it. In deference to the 10th Amendment, that language as an explicit injunction against the Congress itself suggests that the states should be allowed under the Constitution to treat religion in any way they wish. A state could establish an official religion of the, we could be the Baptist state of Georgia. I would prefer we not.
And in fact, some state constitutions did invoke God in their state constitutions. They did not actually say, we're going to be a Catholic state, we're going to be a Baptist state, we're going to be a Quaker state or whatever. But they did invoke God as part of their state charter.
Well, Texas is the Quaker state, right?
You know what? That's another show. I'm not even going there.
It's an oil joke.
Wait, what? I think you lost me on that one.
The Quaker state oil joke?
No. Oh, you're definitely a dad. Because
I punned you in the face. I punned you right in the face. Ah!
Yes. So, and we're moving toward the Supreme Court. I just want to tag what you talked about real quick because
one more real quick. Just the rest of this piece of the argument is what is happening here with the freedom from with the first what they're doing is they're using the government as a cudgel for the explicit purpose. The explicit purpose. Of prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's what's being done. Is through the machinery of the court. This organization is prohibiting the free exercise thereof. If they can argue that because the amendment is an explicit injunction on the Congress and not on all actors, that they retain the freedom to enjoin the free practice of religion, then the counter argument clearly is that the state is not prohibited. The individual states of the United States are not, by this amendment, prohibited from the establishment and respect of a single religion. And that should terrify everyone, but most especially these cowards whose case should be dismissed out of hand, and I believe probably would be if it were actually challenged, on the grounds that they haven't grounds to bring the case, because, as we stated earlier, there hasn't been there has not been a complaint made.
It's not just that there hasn't been a complaint made. When the Constitution was written, there was never any thought that went into the mind of the founders that we would ever directly elect senators, that we would ever directly elect the president. We would directly elect the Congress, and the Congress would be our representative republic, as it were. And I say that in air quotes because, man, we're long past that point. But that the Congress was basically going to act as a buffer between the people and the state. And because the Congress was going to be that buffer, the founders understood, given the Congress the power to do anything other than control the money was extremely dangerous. And so that brings us to the 1960s, Thomas Jefferson's letter that I've referenced multiple times. In short, what happened in the 60s was the Supreme Court had cases brought to it, and they made what I would argue are unconstitutional decisions. They made unconstitutional decisions. And before you say, well, it's the Supreme Court, how can they make an unconstitutional decision? They do it all the time. Just for you leftists that may or may not catch this, let me ask you, do you feel like the Supreme Court got the Citizens United case right? Because my guess is you don't feel like they got that one right at all. Not even a little bit. And then, of course, you can go to the most infamous example, the Dred Scott case. And the Dred Scott case was important not just because they said, hey, Mr. Dred Scott, sorry, you're still a slave. No, the court actually overreached terribly. And it's actually a large part of what led to the Civil War. It undid the Missouri Compromise. It codified the status of blacks as basically a permanent underclass, and many other things. There's a few others that I would point out, like maybe the Plessy versus Ferguson that just said, wow, civil rights? No, we don't have to worry about that. You can't federalize civil rights, even though under the original intent of the Constitution, civil rights were always a federal matter. The government existed to protect your rights from other people, not from the government itself. And then, we can go down some rabbit holes, like the Supreme Court decision that said, hey, FDR, you can totally keep all those Japanese people in concentration camps because all those slanty-eyed people look the same. And if that offends you, good. That's the point, because sometimes the Supreme Court gets things wrong. And I contend that they got these decisions in the 1960s terribly wrong, because up until the 1960s, if you were a teacher who had faith and you wanted to pray with your students, you could. And it was not something that the majority of the parents, the students, the community at large had a problem with. It was just a thing that was probably going to happen. But then the Supreme Court came along and they took something that was outside the purview of the Constitution. They took a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote in frustration and decided this letter would supersede the Constitution. And now, because of that, we're going to interpret the Constitution to mean a thing that the Constitution itself actually doesn't say. The Constitution says the Congress, the thing that was supposed to have the most power and the quickest turnover in our government, cannot establish a religion. It didn't, as Chris rightly pointed out, it didn't say that any other body was prohibited from establishing, or in this case, even expressing religion. But the Supreme Court in the 1960s said, yeah, well, no, forget all that. Basically, if you're a teacher, if you're a police officer, if you're a firefighter, if you're an FBI agent, whatever, you can't actually express your faith if you're acting in an official capacity. So a new barrier was introduced into our society that literally did not exist before, I'm going to say 1962, 1963, somewhere in that time frame. And what the freedom from, yeah. Yeah, them, those people, the people that bullied my county, that every single school in my county is a Title I school. And what that means is basically my county has so little money, every kid gets free breakfast and free lunch. Okay, let's just be really clear about that, all right? This is the definition of punching down. But they used something that the Supreme Court said in the 1960s. Hey, your football coach is not allowed to have a volunteer chaplain come in and feed your football players chicken and rice and pray with them. It's not okay. Technically, the Supreme Court said that's illegal. That violates the Constitution. And again, I'm just going to reference, Dred Scott, Plessy versus Ferguson, and God knows how many other things that the Supreme Court got wrong. And I'll tell you the one that I think the Supreme Court got wrong in my lifetime was the Obamacare decision. Obamacare's a tax. It is, but it isn't, but it is, but it isn't, but it is, but it isn't. You know what? It is. Obamacare's the law of the land. And now, boom, if you're poor and you cannot afford health insurance, the government's actually going to fine you for not buying health insurance, which seems to really kind of only benefit the health insurance companies, and you kind of wonder why they would sign on to it. No, actually, I'm going to drop the sarcasm shtick. You know exactly why the healthcare companies signed on to that decision because, well, like, for example, I currently work in pest control, and if there was a law that said, hey, everybody in the country is required by law to have pest control, well, I would kind of have a conflict of interest because it would benefit me personally and benefit my industry as a whole.
No, it's not like we didn't see it before in the early 80s when car insurance was made mandatory.
Yes, precisely.
Now, there is a dramatic and important difference. And this is trailing off topic, but since you brought it up, let me just, there is an important difference between health insurance and car insurance in that with car insurance rather, you're required to have car insurance in order to.
That is correct. If you don't want to drive, you don't have to have car insurance. However, health insurance is different. It's not like you can voluntarily stop breathing. Okay, I could make some really dark jokes because you could voluntarily stop breathing, but I'm going to leave all that alone. The point being, the Supreme Court is a human institution, so it is fallible. And let's just cycle this all the way back around to Christianity. Because it's fallible, it makes mistakes, and it's in need of mercy. And they got this one wrong. They got it wrong. What? I'm gonna be a ninth grade social studies teacher, and now I have to take my faith and check it at the door, even though my faith says God the Almighty gave us all grace. He gave us all forgiveness. And this forgiveness and tolerance that I could actually imprint on my students in a positive way, I'm obligated to give them. I'm now just gonna no, I'm no longer that person anymore. I'm no longer that Christian. No, that's not how it works. First Amendment says the Congress can't establish an official religion. But the First Amendment does not say that a football coach is not allowed to pray with his boys because he doesn't want any of them to have a broken leg at the end of the game. So, yeah, I need you to tag that for just a second there, Chris.
Tag. Oh, yeah. Well, damn, I was responding to comments in the. I think Cameron's got something going on with the kids over there. They've had a bit of an adventure this evening. I'm not going to air his laundry, but anyway.
Wait, what? Huh? Sorry, I had to take my headphones out for a second. Somebody had an adventure?
You did, but I wasn't going to go into details. I just said I thought you had to deal with something with the family real quick.
Oh, yeah, one of my little savages, because I also have 4. It's one of the things that Chris and I have in common, and I have seriously debated swinging for number 5 just so I could be the reigning champion of children among our circle of friends.
Careful, buddy. You pop out a 5th one, and I'll start really thinking about making the old Sergeant Major buy me a damn house.
Yeah,
that's not going to happen.
Yeah. Now, my youngest Rugrat, God bless him, somehow managed to trip and fall and bang his face right on the wall, split his eye open, bloody face. The wife currently took him to the emergency room, and one of his brothers just walked into the room, very concerned about him, wanted to make sure he was okay because he's not back yet.
Yeah, I was going to say that, as trips to the emergency room goes, that was quick. So.
Yeah, especially when it's not actually an emergency. They tend to see you a lot quicker when it's this whole thing called triage.
Yeah.
So, all that being said, sometimes the Supreme Court gets it wrong. I live in Polk County, Georgia, because I really just want to be left the hell alone. And I kind of want my kids' coaches to pray with them before the game because I want them to pray about things like sportsmanship and fair play and safety. And now I don't get that here anymore. I literally live in a community where you can just send your kids outside to play because everybody knows everybody, because we have that whole shared experience of Christianity, religion, whatever. And I'd like to say that it pisses me off, but it doesn't. I'm beyond the pissed off point. I'm almost 40 years old, and I have been interested in politics since I was a teenager. I've also been a person of faith since I was a teenager. And I have literally heard derisive comments for coming up on 2/3 of my life now that goes something to the effect of, well, you're just a white Southern Christian. Of course, that's what you think. Of course, that's what you believe. And I am the most disturbed by how numb to it I am. I am the most disturbed by how passively I can accept this as the next link in the chain. How I can look at the situation and be grateful for the fact that Coach Kelley and Reverend Benfield somehow managed to fly under the radar for as long as they did. That's the thing that's the most disturbing to me. The fact that it is not even terribly disturbing to me. The fact that it is so much the norm.
It's not surprising.
I mean, and I wish I was exaggerating in my kind of black pill commentary here, but it really doesn't even make me that angry. These people are bullies. They sailed in out of nowhere. I even commented on their social media and was like, hey, you guys, you punched down. You put Mike Tyson up against a 15-year-old who just learned how to box, and now you're celebrating your victory. And while on a moral level, I find that really offensive and repugnant, and honestly, just, there's no class in that. You want to talk about Southern gentlemen and how
they always punch down.
Oh, yeah. Please note, they did not sue the state of Georgia for having Coach Kelley proselytize in front of the assembly. That's not what happened. Instead, they followed Coach Kelley back to his Title I district, where there are a lot of poor people that, frankly, rely on churches and, yes, the local government to put food in their children's bellies. But it really doesn't make me that angry anymore. I have gotten so used to it. I would use the phrase desensitized. It's not surprising. Not at all. Not in the slightest. And that's the most offensive part. Both as a man, as a Christian, as a father, as an American, as anything that I positively identify myself with. Yeah, it bothers me, but yeah, I'm used to it. I am. And that's the worst part. It really is.
Man, I don't know how to wrap up after that. That was you did get a little black belt there. Well,
I felt like that was the wrap up.
Yeah, kind of. And I ain't gonna lie, I kind of hate to wrap up tonight because we have not been live for several weeks now. Stuff going on.
Basically 6 weeks ever since you had the baby.
Yeah. Well, no. I think it was even a couple weeks before that.
Who's adorable, by the way. I love the pictures. Tell your mom to keep putting them on Facebook.
So, we had we broke 10 viewers at one point tonight. For those of you that stayed through most of the show to watch, I really appreciate you. Do please, if you haven't already, tap that subscribe button, hit the like button, give us a thumbs up, and share this video.
LSS, Like, share, subscribe.
Yes, like, share, subscribe, and especially this one. I mean, I want you to go back and watch our other videos because I'm a greedy capitalist, and I'd love to get to where we're making money off this again. This channel has been completely demonetized for over a year now. I want to say almost 2 years now. We got greased in the first adpocalypse. So we do this for the love of it and out of our own pockets for now. I would love to turn that around sometime, but the other video business is keeping this running. Do like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you again soon. And like I was saying, especially this particular video, this particular conversation about the absolute monsters at FFRF, punching down, beating up on the little guy, and actively suppressing American citizens' First Amendment right to the free practice of religion.
A coach who loves his students and wants to see them do well. Just real quick, I know a lot of these men personally, and they sincerely believe if they can take one young man's life and turn it away from the dark and toward the light, it was worth everything.
So, thanks for watching. We will see you soon. I want to say next week, but I can't make any promises just yet. Keep an eye out, though. We're gonna have some more videos coming out soon. Good night. Thanks for watching, and remember, if you build a man a fire, you'll keep him warm for the evening. But if you set a man on fire, he'll be warm for the rest of his life. Good night. I had to find the button. There it is.